Hey, what's up YouTube? So this time around I've been able to get my hands on iFi Audio's iTube 2. Now in case you're unfamiliar with the device, it is a hybrid tube preamp and buffer, retailing for about $300 to $350, and the device is intended to be put in between your DAC output and an amplification stage, such as the iCan SE, for example. Overall, the design is pretty much identical to the rest of iFi's micro line. The dimensions are exactly the same. The only differences are some of the features and the connections that we get onto it. Compared to the iCan SE, which is a popular device to be paired with the iTube 2, the color is a little bit different. The iTube 2 is a slightly darker color, which sometimes, depending on the light, can either look identical to the iCan SE, or it can have a bit more of a neutral gray color rather than a shiny silvery color. The front of the device houses the volume pot, which also acts as the power switch, and also 3 toggle switches, which allows you to select between different sound effects for the 3D Plus, X-Bass Plus, and the tube sound signatures. On the rear, we get a set of RCA inputs and outputs. Now on the bottom of the device, we have a couple of dip switches, which allows you to change the functionality of the iTube 2 between purely being a buffer or also acting as a preamp. Now for the buffer, we get a 0 dB and a 9 dB setting. In 0 dB, it essentially means it takes a signal, passes it through the tube, and puts it back out again. On 9 dB, it'll do the same thing, but it'll elevate the entire signal by 9 dB. In the preamp, pretty much the same thing, except for a preamp, you get to use the control to change the volume. Now lastly, we get to the top of the device. There's an LED over here, which is used to indicate when the iTube 2 is ready to be used. Now, generally for tubes, they need to be warmed up before you can use them, and that's still true for this device, but the LED does not go off temperature, but rather it seems a timer, and the timer is set for roughly a minute or so, just under a minute. So you can turn on the device, wait for about a minute, and then the LED will turn yellow, indicating that it's ready to use. But if you switch it off and switch it back on again, it's not going to be just a couple of seconds. It's going to again be a minute before the LED is yellow. But even though that timer is set for a minute, iFi states that in order for the tubes to get to their optimum temperature and to sound, for the device to sound its best, you need to wait for about 20 minutes or so. Now, one design element that iFi have included on this device, which I quite like, is on the tittle of the eye, there's a hole rather than just being a tittle of an eye. And usually with tubes, part of their charm is the nice warm orange glow that you get from them, which of course, because the tube is built into this device, you're not going to really see that. But this little hole over here does allow some of the light to shine through. But under any kind of indoor artificial lighting, you're not really going to see the glow, but rather you need to switch off the lights in order to really see any of it. Okay, so the last thing to talk about in terms of the design is that it does get a little bit hot. After about an hour's use or so, you could use it as a hand warmer. Okay, so lastly, we get to the sound of the device. Now, the whole intention of a tube preamp or buffer is to add a bit of tubey goodness to the sound. So the question is, does the iTube 2 actually do that? Well, to be perfectly honest with you, I'm not entirely sure. A small disclaimer here is, this is, as far as I know, my first experience with a tube-based product. Now, perhaps when I was younger, I might have listened to a tube-based amplifier or sound system or whatever and not have known. But ever since I've knowingly stepped into the world of hi-fi audio, this is my first tube-based product. So really, it's a bit difficult going into a review not really knowing what to expect. My only expectations are based off of what people say on forums and on other YouTube videos. So it was an interesting little experiment for me. Now, as mentioned, the front of the device does have 3 settings for the tube sound effects. Now, what iFi have done here is they've tried to give one device 3 distinct sound signatures based on the different type of topologies usually used in a tube-based system. So at the top, we have a set, which is a single-ended triode. The middle position is a classic, and the bottom is a push-pull configuration. Now, one thing I really wanted to do is to try and see what the actual differences are between these sound signatures, but unfortunately I wasn't able to do that, because if you watch my previous videos, I always go on about how important it is to volume match, and changing the switch does change the volume slightly, so that does skew the differences that I hear, because I can't decide whether those differences that I'm hearing are because of a different sound effect, or if it's because of a change in volume. But for whatever reason, I constantly found myself putting it onto the push-pull. I don't know if that was just convenience or if I just naturally gravitated towards that sound. So why might you buy a device like this? Well, because if you like a tube sound and you want to add a bit of tubey goodness to your system, then you might want to use this. So does it sound tubey? Well, I'm not entirely sure on exactly how tubey it sounds. I was expecting a bigger difference, again based off of reviews and impressions that you read online. So why did I not experience a bigger difference in sound? Well, maybe the differences aren't as big, and the impressions that you get off of the internet is, well, it's the internet. People exaggerate, knowingly or otherwise. Or perhaps because it's a hybrid-based system rather than a full-on tube, maybe that has an effect to it. So if I had to describe the difference I was hearing between a purely solid-state system and adding in the iTube 2, back in the days, the early days of filming, especially when they filmed actresses, they would use Vaseline or some other product to just give a little bit, a thin layer on the lens, just to give an overall like slightly out of focus, dreamy kind of look. Essentially just trying to beautify. Now you kind of get the same effect on some of the modern smartphones for the front-facing camera, where it would kind of take away some of the sharpening or whatever. It's just meant to cover up some flaws. Think of it as like digital makeup kind of thing. That's kind of what I was hearing from the IFI. It was just I don't know if it was really changing anything in the sound stage. Like, I kind of want to say that it did, but it wasn't something that I could really pick up on every single time. But it did roll off the highs just a little bit. It made everything just sound a little bit smoother. So that's where it led me to the idea of Vaseline on the lens kind of thing. So overall, I'd say the effect that it has is it beautifies the sound. Rolling off the highs, making it smoother. It does make the sound less accurate, but if it makes it more pleasant, and obviously that is subjective, if it makes it more pleasant, who cares? If that's the type of thing that you want in your sound, and there's nothing wrong with that, because arguably music shouldn't just be about trying to find flaws, because essentially, especially as a reviewer, when you're reviewing things for accuracy, you're going to be finding flaws, and music is not about flaws. Well, in fact, music is flawed, and that's kind of what makes it an art. So if you want to add a little bit of tubey goodness into your sound system, then yeah, the iTube 2 does seem like a reasonable product to use. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed it. If you've got any comments or questions, please leave them in the comments, and I'll catch you in the next one. Cheers, YouTube.